And we're here tonight because for a very exciting reason, which is Roya Hakakian has written a new book. It's not even officially available, I don't think, although apparently a lucky few have been able to get copies. And it's called A Beginner's Guide to America. I always have to look at it because I get the words mixed up. A Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious. And I think the actual publication date is next week. Is that right, Roya? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Roya, although I suspect most of the people here already know a lot about Roya. She was born in Iran, lived through the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and later emigrated to the United States in 1985 with political asylum. She had been a Farsi poet turned television producer, and then she became very well known for her memoir, Journey from the Land of No, in 2004, which was my first exposure to Roya before I even met her as an actual person. I read the book, and if you haven't read it, it's a charming, wonderful, inspiring, scary, lovely story of true story, which was written so beautifully that it just captivates you. She also writes essays and has been awarded many awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2008. She published Assassins of the Turquoise Palace in 2011, a nonfiction account of the Mykonos restaurant assassinations of Iranian opposition leaders in Berlin. She's a founding member of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center and serves on the board of Refugees International. So it's really delightful to have you here tonight, Roya. And Roya had asked, since this is her first book talk for this book, that if we could do a Shehechianu. And I thought about how to do it, and I think we're just going to go for the cacophony of each of us saying the Shehechianu. If you want to unmute and put your voice into the crazy mix, and just make it like a soup of delicious Shehechianu to note this really wonderful occasion. I'll start and people please join in. Baruch atah Adonai. There you have it, a Becky Shehechianu on Zoom. So it's official, your first.
Can we have everybody mute again though, please?
Oh,
thank
you. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions to get things started. And I did get a chance to I got a PDF of the book, and I told you I sent an email saying I kind of fell into it and couldn't tear myself away from it. So I kind of lost a day of chores and things that I thought I was going to be doing, but instead I was reading the book. But it's really great. It's beautifully written, of course. And it's written as a guidebook. And I found that fascinating. And I'd love to hear why you set it up that way. Why is that the structure?
Hi, everybody. I'm just really speechless, and thank you for the Shehechianu. I thought I recommended, and then we forget all about it, but it was really wonderful to do it. And thank you for that beautiful introduction, Shoshana. You and I had never talked about my memoir, and I was really touched by how you described it. So I was trying to figure out how I could get people to have a different sort of conversation about immigrants and immigration. And that was because in 2016, I began reading a whole bunch of books about immigrants and immigration. And they all very quickly from the opening pages appeared to be angry on the left or angry on the right. And I felt that, each book or each sort of side of the argument had some valid points, but they were so angry and they were so partisan. And I suppose to some degree, understandably, they were angry. that they were not, that none of us were actually talking to each other, but we were just, that we were just talking at each other. So it became very important to me to try to figure out how it was, how it is, or how it was, I should say, that I could find a different way um, of kind of engaging in this conversation without the reader falling into a known position. In other words, the reader always reads these third person accounts, whether they're newspaper reports or memoirs by immigrants. It was either first person or third person. And so I thought we as readers are comfortable hearing that voice, the third person voice of a journalist or some other, godlike person observing or commenting, and or the first person, offering a personal account. And I thought, what if I were to do something that was neither the first one nor the second one? And could I then jar people into listening in a way that they weren't listening? And then I thought, I thought of the second person voice. In other words, the cookbook advice giving voice, which as a writer was also an interesting challenge for me, because since you talked about the memoir, as soon as a memoir was published, I got a call from my editor in 2005, and she said, "Oh, we're so pleased with your memoir. Why don't you do a sequel?" And I said, "I don't want to do a sequel." And she said, "But that's all you can do. You're a memoirist. You can write in the first person." And I thought, what a nightmare that I have to write in my own personal voice for the rest of my life. It was nothing that I was looking forward to. So I thought, the first thing I need to do is to get out of that and do something entirely different, just to make sure people understand that I like to and I can do other things. So I did the second book, which was in the third person. And so as a writer, it was an interesting creative challenge for me to see what it would be like to write in the second person, which is this.
And it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned the second person, and I hadn't thought about it, but when you're reading it, the sentences often start with, "You will find something, something, something," or "This will happen to you." And I didn't think about it, but that when you're reading that, it brings you into the experience in a different way. So it's actually quite powerful, and it is a very unusual style. So I think it's going to be very distinctive, and people will really remember it and feel it.
Mhm. Well, I wanted to, okay, I didn't want to say his name, but I'm going to have to. So when Trump was saying that immigrants come here and they commit crimes and they, rape and, do whatever, rob, the first thing that came to my mind was, wait a minute, when we come over, we're so disoriented that the last thing on our minds is to go commit crime, because it's just so, I mean, anybody who has ever been uprooted knows that, being uprooted is such a disorienting, dizzying experience that you really can't do anything other than put one foot in front of the other if you're so lucky. And so I thought, it was another reason why I thought the second person would work, because I thought, what if I could actually bring people, if not inside the experience, but really up close to the immigrant experience? And could they then hear things and see things that they wouldn't ordinarily? And therefore, without me saying it's absolutely asinine to say that immigrants come here to do those things, but then allow the reader to surmise from from those coming to see and experience in such close proximity, and allow them to surmise that it would be nearly impossible for the immigrant to have such inclinations upon arrival. And so that was another.
And I wondered about the timing of writing the book, but I think you've alluded to part of the reason. I mean, obviously you came here quite a while ago, and now you've been moved to write this book. And you mentioned 2016, and you mentioned the name of a leader who we won't have to mention anymore, but can you speak a little bit about how that inspired you to bring this book to all
Yeah.
of us?
Well, I, when he started saying the things that he was saying, I think many immigrants like myself had a visceral reaction to his manner of speech, to the words he was using, to the misinformation he was giving out. But I think most of all, I felt that all of us as Americans, whether naturalized or not, are called to service at one point or another in our lives. And I thought that through his rhetoric, he had called me to service, that it was my turn to do something of value for this country. Now, I don't know if I've done it. I think it's a big, it's a grandiose statement to make. But I thought, for my part, I should try to make a contribution. And it was because I took all that very, both personally and also seriously, as a refugee, as an immigrant, and also as an American. And so I thought, someone has to set the record straight, but it isn't just a reaction to Trump. It was also, I think, a very important conversation for all of us, sort of, world citizens to have, because I think the refugee issue is going to only get worse, and that and the immigration issue will only become more dire. And therefore, it falls upon us to try to figure it out in a way that that is more than just us saying, let's raise the quotas, because that will not solve the problem. It will not be enough. No matter how kind we are and how many we accept, it will not be enough. So I thought, it's also, the people on the other side of the argument had some valid points to make, but because we were all so tangled up in anger, we weren't able to listen to each other. So, I try to allude to these things in the book in one way or another.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, it strikes me that people who come to America, they come from all over the world, from lots of different circumstances. Some people are refugees, some are seeking asylum, some are coming for economic reasons or other reasons. What are the things that you think they all kind of have in common, and why a book like yours might be important? What are the big points that you see are commonalities?
Right. So I was reading a series of books on immigration and about immigrants, and by immigrants, and I realized that there were an oversupply of books about specific immigrant communities, the Jews, or the Poles, or the Chinese, and then there were even books that were kind of scoring everybody. These ones are better because they come with X, Y, and Z, and those are not so good, and the reason these ones are successful. And then it occurred to me that we are so we are so focusing on individual immigrants or immigrant communities that we are creating this problem, which was manifesting in part in some of what Trump was saying, was that, not shithole countries, but let's get more Norwegians. And I thought, it's so much already, even if he hadn't said it, it was so much part of the way we were talking about the immigration experience, by trying to, be so scientifically distinguishing between this one and that one and that one, that we were losing the big picture. That at the end of the day, there are commonalities, there are overarching experiences that make all of immigrants so much to have so much more in common than not. And so I try in this book to remind us that yes, we come with certain assets or without certain assets, but the experience of being uprooted is so earth-shattering that we have no other choice but become a lot more similar than we are different. And so those observations are, for instance, first of all, anybody who's had to learn a new language from scratch knows that it's hell. There's nothing easy about it. None of it makes sense. And no matter how talented you are, it just takes time. And, so I think all of us, whether we are, Germans or we are Mexicans, we just won't say certain things the right way. And people will keep telling us, I beg your pardon, I beg your pardon. And I remember in the beginning when I first heard, I beg your pardon, I couldn't hear the three parts. So I was hearing it as abegapado. And I think I went to someone and said, what the hell is that? Abegapado. And then somebody broke it up for me and said, this is what they're trying to say. So I think it can be something as small as the difficulty of learning language, no matter where you come from, or something as large as an experience that a friend of mine who's also from Iran and a woman said to me 2 months after she had been in the US. She said she had gone to do a training program at Yale as a doctor, and she came to me teary-eyed one day and she said, and she had been at the top of her class in Iran. She was a star student, which is why she had gotten a visa to come here briefly. And she said, I don't think I can ever go back to Iran. And I said, why? And she said, something happened today that has completely changed me. And I said, what happened? And she said, I was in a meeting with, great experts in the field. And one of them turned to me and said, so what do you think about this case? And she said, no one had ever asked my opinion in a group that consisted of people who were even more experienced or knowledgeable than me. And I felt so changed by this one question that I don't think I can ever go back to a place where I won't be asked this question. So, it can be, you can be somebody who has had great skills, great education, and still something that small can transform you. And these are the things that we almost never even see because we expect them to be there, like the trees and the air, but they're all small miracles that we have come to as a result of this, imperfect but marvelous system that we have established. And so I think part of the effort of the book is to also try to make those who haven't lived elsewhere see the things that we see because we were not born into what you were born into.
Can you say a little more about that? Because you do touch on that in the book. You know, that one of the things about being an immigrant, or probably anybody really in America, is that you have to embrace and love America, but that doesn't mean you can't be critical of certain things. And I would imagine that that takes some juggling if you're from another country and you're on one hand trying to assimilate, but you're also noticing things that aren't exactly right. And can you say anything about that?
Sure. I mean, I think I mean that also has a range, right? So I mean the range of criticisms can begin with food. You know, their food is bland and you know, they don't know how to cook, which I've heard a lot. And you know, what can I say? I'll go silent on that one. And then and then it can go to serious stuff, which as you have seen in the book, you know, I think the gun issue is really something that not just it isn't an observation that only I have made, but I think so many of us who come from other countries, even war-torn places. It's one thing when you know two ethnicities within a country are at war, and so you experience violence. But the thought that in your own neighborhood, you know, somebody that you pass by on the street every day on your way to school can one day, you know, show up at your elementary school with a machine gun is uniquely American. You know, it doesn't happen in other places in the world. So I think you know, the easy observations are, you know, the cooking or you know the buffets, and you know that with the all you can eat stuff, which are amazing, and or the supermarkets with the great variety or the superfluous number of things that you can find. And then it goes to the more serious stuff. And I think as immigrants, the more assimilated or comfortable we feel, then the more comfortable we grow into the idea of airing our criticism, because it's because you have to you have to feel that your position is not threatened, and you also have to feel that you don't have to be afraid of surveillance or you know the big brother looking over your shoulder when you speak the truth and worry about that. So I think it's a matter of balancing, but I think you know most of us grow into it as we become more and more comfortable.
And obviously, you're someone who's thought a lot about your citizenship and being an American and being an immigrant and being here. I'm wondering, I think a lot of us were very shaken in the past year by some of the events, and particularly, you know, the insurrection at the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me, it tapped a very primitive thing of like, but wait a minute, this is a democracy and this is how democracy is supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine that someone like yourself might also have very strong feelings, and you've lived through a revolution. So it's not that the violence was in and of itself so intense, but can you talk a little bit about what it was like seeing that moment or being part of that?
You know, I'm writing another piece today, and I think and that's precisely what I was saying, that you know the American democracy matters to us as Americans because we live here, but the American democracy matters to everybody else around the world too, because if this falls apart, then the hope of so many elsewhere also vanishes. So I think you know it's no accident that you know the 2016 election also emboldened so many other copycats, you know, in Brazil, in Hungary, around the world. So I think the American democracy is important for us as citizens, but it's also important for the health of the global community. And these two things are really interrelated. And so we have a dual responsibility to make sure that this democracy works. So one of the things that I try to do in the book is to try to bring out, although, maybe I do it in some places too funny, because I looked up on Amazon, and last week the book was #3 on ethnic humor category. I was thinking, okay, it's funny, but is it #3 funny? But one of the things that I try to do in the book is to try to show that democracy, unlike what we think, isn't just about elections. We so focus of democracy manifesting itself in our rights as citizens to vote for whomever we want. But then we forget that democracy has 1,001 different ways of manifesting itself on a daily basis. And unless we see all these smaller manifestations, then it is easier to lose sight of it. So one of the things that I try to do in the book is to show you that if we have a merchandise that we're able to take back to the store 3 weeks after we purchased it, that is also a manifestation of democracy. Because as consumers, we have rights, because as citizens, we have rights. So everybody seems to love that section about returning stuff to stores, but think about it. I mean, it never happened, in Iran. In fact, when I told a friend of mine who, the same friend of mine who was here from Iran, for a couple of months, let's go return a sweater to Gap, she said, oh, we're going to get arrested. I couldn't believe that such a thing was possible. Or so many other things. I remember looking at people for the first year that I was here, and looking at how comfortably and oddly people dressed on the streets, and no one gave a damn, and it's important to be able to recognize. It's sort of like marriage. You marry whoever you marry because he has a big job or he comes from a great family. But at the end of the day, what makes the marriage beautiful is the very small things that are even negligible or you can't even notice, that take place on a daily basis. And I think democracy and our ability to keep our democracy healthy also requires that all of us begin to recognize the minute manifestations of our democracy in these small places. And if we don't, then we're more likely to lose it, because it isn't just about elections. And if we just focus on that big thing, then we're losing the sight of all the smaller things that keep that up. And so I try to make those small observations in the book, to remind all of you that, if we show up in our shorts or lie on the grass in the park and listen to whatever music we want, all of those things are truly small miracles. And we have to recognize all those small things, or else, January 6th will happen over and over again. I mean, we have to do a lot of other things too, but I think that is one important step to be able to see how it shapes the beautiful routines of our daily lives.
I'm going to just ask one more thing, and then I think we'll open it up to questions. So if people want to put in your question, Q and comment thing in the chat. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but taking off from that point, another thing you mentioned in the book that you noticed when you first arrived was just the variety of kinds of people and languages being spoken. Mm-hmm. And to me, that goes along as well with what you were just talking about, and how part of democracy, I think, is the variety that all of our peoples and where we came from bring to it. And I'd love it if you wanted to just say a little bit more about that and how
That's
that.
the thing that I think, people who've been born and raised here don't see that, if you don't live in a democracy, you don't get to see the diversity of races, religions, cultures that we see here, because other people from other parts of the world would be afraid to go to a place that is undemocratic. And, a perfect example, and a tragic example, is the way Afghans live in Iran. Afghans, first of all, Afghanistan once upon a time was part of the Persian Empire. So there isn't a more kindred ethnicity or community to Iranians than Afghans are. And then they speak Persian, so they can't even blend in. And yet they are so profoundly mistreated that they look for every opportunity as refugees to leave Iran and go elsewhere. And I think that we need to also see that if we are able to go out on the street and eat Mexican or Japanese or Indian or Israeli, all of these small things that we chalk up to cuisine, that diversity of cuisine exists because we are democratic. And the first time I had to explain this was when at a book reading over my memoir, someone said, so, you were Jewish in Iran, were you Reform or were you conservative or were you Orthodox? And I said, you guys have all these distinctions because you live as Jews in democracies. I didn't live in a democracy. We just had one kind of Jew, and that was me. And whatever I was, everybody else was too. So the fact that we are such, community of Jewish, diverse Jewish thinking and practice is also a gift of this democracy, because we can do our own thing and be part of the Jewish community at the same time. So, let's see all of these things, and let's not just think that that we have to think about, this democracy every 4 years. No, I think it needs to be a daily practice, and requires daily reminders.
I like that. I think that should be the title of your next book. Democracy is a daily practice. I would buy it. Daryl, do we have some questions?
We have one to start, and hopefully people will line up. David has the first question.
Roya, I'm sure in your thinking about immigration in the United States and the historical context, you became very aware that even before we became a country, a wave of immigrants would be xenophobic about the next wave of immigrants, especially if they were a different ethnicity. Ben Franklin writes about it in terms of the discrimination against what became the Pennsylvania Dutch by the English settlers. So this goes way back. When you think about being my immigrant in America in that context where we've been nasty to the next wave all through our history, how does that make you feel, and how does that affect your thinking?
First of all, these are conversations I was having with Rob, who helped me think through this a great deal. So again, thank you, Rob. But I mentioned in the beginning that we have a beautiful imperfect system, and I think we have had, as a Western nation, we have had a superior, imperfect immigration history. So we haven't been kind to newcomers. And it seems that we have been, in fact, consistently unkind. At least one should give us credit, because we didn't discriminate about discriminating against whoever that was coming. So we have done that. And as you say, Franklin was, hated the Germans, and, there were some other founding fathers who thought that the French were not white enough. And then, it went on. And then we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then we put the Japanese in internment camps. I mean, there's no shortage of bad behavior toward immigrant communities. And yet, what we can always say, which doesn't vindicate the bad behavior, but just puts it in perspective, is that we're still better off than almost all other Western nations. And we are still ahead. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't improve the way we are. We should, and we must. But we are all part of this, human community that is that has a very dark history and is trying to improve itself by, decade after decade, century after century. And I think when we compare the way we have, after one generation or two, allowed our communities to blend in eventually, then I think things in that larger perspective begin to look better than they would if we only, look at it as, we were bad to this group and that group without sort of this larger global perspective.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions yet, but I have a question. Could you favor us with a short reading of a section so that we can get a real taste for the
Does Shoshana have a favorite part?
I actually found the prologue incredibly moving, but that's, you probably want to get into more than that. I think you probably have a favorite part.
I read something for a radio interview. Where was it? Okay, well, I talked about the returning of the items. Okay, well, how about a visit to Costco?
Oh, that sounds good.
Right. Let me pull that up. Daryl?
Yes? What?
I am trying to.
Oh, are you sharing?
Oh, no, I'm not sharing. Is it showing up?
Is what showing up?
Can you see my screen?
No. Are you sharing your screen?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, then we can't see it.
Okay, so I'll read.
Okay.
So the book has two major sections. The first 4 chapters are about sort of the early years of the immigrants' arrival. And then the last 4 chapters focus on what happens after you're more comfortable and you have kind of chilled and are over your first anxieties. So this passage is from that latter section of the book. And I don't know if all of it will make sense, but I'll try to, since I didn't pick it in advance, so I bear with me. So you used to be without so many things you now have, but you did not feel so alone then. This is America's great mystery. You have probably gained a few pounds since you arrived. Many newcomers do. but in spirit, you're lighter than you have ever been. Like candy, you too came in different flavors once, hard and tart outside of home, and when inside, soft and sweet, though tinged with the day's sour goings on. Each day that you ventured out, you camouflaged yourself so as not to draw attention and chance getting stalked, questioned, arrested, abused. You walked, you walked more stiffly and purposefully then. You kept an eye on who followed you and who was ahead. You steered clear of anyone in uniform, even a traffic officer. These days, you have shed that jittery persona. You're carefree and pay little attention to who or what is behind or ahead. The old foreboding you had each time you set off from home has lifted. You saunter now. You have developed a liking for wandering, if only to discover new places. Sometimes you pause to pet a passing puppy. You have mastered the American art of making canine conversation. How adorable! Is it a he or a she? You also know to ask permission before laying a hand on that venerated fur and to exercise curiosity. What breed is he? Above all, you know how to say all this naturally. You do not let on that you come from a place where dogs were nameless mutts that paced the streets of your childhood. You will not cringe when a friend's dog sits on the couch at your side, its saliva dampening the velvet fabric. If the neighbor's dog dies and you see him go by without a leash in hand, you know that you must put on a somber face and stop to say that you're sorry for his loss. The nation that invented individuality extends selfhood to its animals and anoints them each, the wonders of America.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
We had a question from Arthur. Arthur, do you want to go ahead and do that? Or do you want me to read your question?
Do it. You know, I was so struck.
Hi, Betty.
I was so struck by your comments about what you noticed that I never think about, you know, the diversity and that you talked about. But given that, how did you feel when I'm sure you realized very quickly that there is some racism, prejudice, anti-Semitism in this country. And the big thing is the anti-African American racism is the most obvious. So what did you think about that in this great democracy?
Right. Well, you know, okay, it is probably the greatest blight on this history and this civilization, right? It's the thing that I think as Americans, the cross that we all bear for many generations to come. However, I had only seen one African American in my life prior to leaving Iran, only because I had a cousin who worked at the embassy of Zambia in Iran, and she happened to bring me to one of the parties at the embassy, and that's when I saw people who had a different complexion, you know. So that is to say that we cannot absolve what happened to African Americans in this country, but you see, as an immigrant, the first thing that I saw was that look at all these colors that I had never seen. Look at this vast landscape of human possibility. And then, you know, I think the deeper answer to this is, as an immigrant, I feel that part of the fact that I am accepted is because of all the things that African Americans have done throughout the decades and the centuries to gain their own rights. So I think by constantly struggling for their own equal rights. They have expanded the American consciousness in a way that it has had to become more tolerant of others and outsiders. And to some degree, I feel that the fact that immigrants are more accepted or are more at home here, or compared to other Western nations, find it easier to make a life in America is in part due to the struggles that African Americans have made through the centuries to make Americans treat them or make this society an equal society for all races, and a society that also extends equal rights to them. I think we are sort of the indirect beneficiaries of all their struggles for equal rights.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Roya. Helen, you had a question?
I do. How do you think your Jewish background affected your approach to or your perspective on this issue? You've had a few Jewish immigrants over the generations, so.
I think I'm not sure I can answer that immediately. I have to think about it a little, but I think one of the things that was always available to me was my own memories of HIAS and NIANA, and these are organizations that, Jewish organizations that sponsor persecuted religious minorities into the United States and then help resettle them. So I think I had some access to a larger pool of eyewitness accounts through first my own experiences at HIAS, through HIAS and NIANA. But then, I was also working with Carol Klickfeld at the Jewish Federation for several years on Russian resettlement. So many of our conversations with the Russian immigrants were in the back of my mind as I was trying to, kind of reconstruct certain scenes and certain recollections. So some of it is that, and I think in a bigger way, I just think that being Jewish historically has made us better travelers. I'm not sure it makes a whole lot of sense, but I think there is, something within us or at least just the knowledge that we have gone from place to place and we have eventually made it, has made it possible for us to feel that being uprooted doesn't need to mean the end of everything as we knew it, that restarting another life is possible. And I think that confidence in part comes from Egypt, comes from the fact that it was difficult, but we made the transition to another place and rebuilt a life. And I think that that was also in the back of my mind, kind of trying to reach for those lessons in trying to offer advice or guidance to the immigrant and the curious.
Thank you.
Okay.
Steve Fraud has the next question.
Unmute.
Steve, unmute,
Thank you.
please.
My question was Helen's question, so it was answered. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll go to Donna.
Yeah, so we're all immigrants going back a generation or two or three. And I'm just wondering, having young teenagers, whether your sons, you think, have a different worldview, better or worse, because they are first generation Americans, first generation born here, and how their background, especially having two parents who are immigrants, how it may have affected them for better or worse. And I know that's unique to their own talents and the wonder of your sons. But in general, if you think it makes a real difference in their perspective.
I should ask them. They're around. I, I think they are. I mean, Keon started the first chapter of Amnesty at his school. Apparently, Amnesty didn't have a club, and he kind of brought Amnesty activities to the school, which was pretty terrific. And Ellie is doing similar things where he is. So I think the effect has been that they, without us prompting them at all, is to try to extend the hand to others and and try to create possibilities of developing a sense of awareness of others who are not, who haven't been born and raised into the same standards of living. So I think they're doing a good job without. I mean, I don't want to burden them with, my history, and I, often say, let's not keep saying, oh, if you only knew where we come from, blah blah. And I think it makes for a very boring parent, but it also, I think, burdens a child with the the weight that parents bring. But despite all that, despite the fact that I try not to impart that on them, I find them be incredibly sensitive to at school, to other communities that are immigrants or underprivileged, and I'm very proud of the things that they have taken the initiative to start in their schools.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a couple of questions, but if somebody else has a question, now would be the time to let me know. Okay. So my question is, actually, I have two questions. Because the book is intended for newer immigrants, are there plans for the book to be translated into other languages?
Well,
or is the language, or is the language unsophisticated enough that people who are not facile with English able to actually gain what you want them to from it?
Okay, I'm going to tell you a secret, but
Okay.
You can't tell anyone. The book pretends to be for immigrants.
Got it.
Really for non-immigrants, and I just thought that my job is to create an opportunity for the native-born Americans to eavesdrop on an immigrant conversation, so that they can start seeing things that they don't, and hearing things that they may not. So no, it's not. I mean, to answer your question, it's not for those who arrive immediately. I'm sure after a few years, when people master the language, especially, I think the next generation will get a kick out of the book and its observations. But all I wanted to do was to get those who are actually not immigrants to open up, and without feeling defensive. And that's why it kind of pretends to be a book for immigrants, because if you begin to eavesdrop then on a conversation that you think is not about you, then you are more likely to be open to hearing whatever it is that you decipher is being said about you. So that's what the book really is. And
Well, very tricky, but
very tricky.
but it
Sure.
sounds like you achieved that goal from what I've
We have to ask
gleaned from this conversation. I do. I have one other question, and then I've had a couple of other people chime in since, which is the book going to be available as an audiobook? Because it's in the second person, it seems it would almost be, it would lend itself quite well to hearing someone talking directly to you about this. And just wondering.
Especially if you read it yourself, Roya.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it is available in audiobook. It comes out on March 16, and I have read it. But
all right.
yeah, and I didn't know, but there's a studio in New Haven where a lot of Yale professors and other writers locally go to record their audiobooks. So the first and second day that I went, after I was done, it took 2-3 hours, and the audio engineer was, somewhere else. He didn't interact. It was COVID. We were trying to keep apart. So at the end of the session, after, a 4-hour-long session, he came out and he said, "Can I just say something?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I've been hearing all these books by all these professors who put down this country, and say all these things about how bad we are. And what a breath of fresh air it is. I'm feeling good, today after listening to you." And I thought, great, it's time somebody said a few things that made us feel good. So at least the audio engineer was quite pleased with the way things turned out. So we'll see how I read. But I have to say, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I thought, you stand there and you start reading and it goes smoothly. Your stomach grumbles, they stop you. You start getting phlegmy for whatever reason, they stop you. It's incredibly hard. And I have just really newfound respect for good audiobook readers after the torment I went through.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Marcia, you had a question?
Yes, kind of a question comment.
Hi, Marcia.
Hi, Roya. I'm very struck by what you said early on, that you felt this was something that you could contribute.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge to me directly and to each of us to find what we can contribute at this moment in our country's history. I've felt from your comments all along, whenever I, run into you, that you approach what's been going on in the past few years just the way I would want to approach it, and with all of the horror and now opportunity. And so I feel challenged by this, and also buoyed, and can't wait to read the book. I loved your other books. And wonder, just to throw out into the ether, the idea of study groups to help us all notice the everyday things that make this a democracy and that we would not want to lose, and how to go about contributing in this moment.
Well, that's very interesting, because what happens is that I think, at least at this moment in my own experience with publishing, my publisher is kind of on the fence, trying to see how the book sits with readers and how it's received. And I think if they begin to think that there, you know, such a possibility as you just articulated can come from this book, then they may begin to think about, you know, sort of leaning that way with the book. And it's precisely how I really want people to think about it, you know. And you know, both in the Wall Street Journal review and a few early small reviews, the blurbs that I've received, people say, you know, here's an immigrant who looks at the mundane and extracts the profound from the mundane. And that's really, it's high compliment, and I'm humbled by it, but it's really what I am hoping this book can do, that we walk around and say, what are the things that wouldn't be here if we didn't have a democracy? And I promise you, you will begin to see things you have never seen. I mean, your traffic rules work beautifully. That's also because of a democracy. Because in places where people don't believe that the laws are just, they don't abide by traffic laws. And you are always in a gridlock, and everybody's always honking. But that's a manifestation of another frustration. The only reason you start to drive normally and you stop at a red light and you come to a full stop at a stoplight, at a stop sign, is because however imperfectly this justice system or system of laws works, we still believe that for the most part, it is good for us. And it is the product of a democracy we believe in. And that's why we don't get into accidents and we don't run into gridlocks all the time, because all of us have some faith that it's there for a reason and it's good. And so I think you're right. I hope this is what the book does. And I hope study groups begin to sprout everywhere, where people begin to you know, extract from the book and you know, make observations for themselves about, you know, the things that they didn't notice before.
Thank you. Wonderful. Isaiah, you had a comment?
Yeah,
Hi,
hello.
how are
So
you?
happy to hear you. But, you know, listening to you made me think about, you know, I lived in Germany for a year in 84, 85, and in Israel, 85, 86. And when I was in Germany, I was applying for jobs in orchestras in Germany and didn't get one invitation to an audition even. There's a pendulum as to whether they wanted Americans or not in their orchestras, and the pendulum had swung. But listening to you talk about your experience and about what you're writing about in this book, it made me think about the experiences I had contemplating the possibility, if I would have gotten a job in an orchestra in Germany, or if I would have stayed in Israel after playing in the Jerusalem Symphony, when would I have felt at home there? You know, and the experience of having lived in those two places and then come back here, it made me appreciate America more in various ways. And, you know, what listening to you talk about your experience here made me think about coming back with that perspective a little bit different. And I can't wait to read the book now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Last call for questions or comments. Harriet, was that a hand raised? Okay, go ahead.
Harriet? I haven't seen
Harriet, it's Harriet. But I just want to say how you, that I was astounded once. I was at a conference in Italy and an Italian woman was talking about how she loved American hotels and that room service, they were gods. You could call room service and they would do anything for you. You need a cab, room service. You need an iron, room service. You need aspirin, room service. You need advice, room service. And I just thought of room service as that thing, you know, that's what you would do if you had a lot of money. You could go call room service. And so there's an appreciation that one gets for America and for the things that we think of as mundane. When just as you said, Roy, I'm just underscoring your words, that you don't appreciate them until someone else presents it to you in their light. And so it's just astounding to learn like that. So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roya.
Oh, so are we done? Can I ask the last question?
You can ask the last question.
When am I going to get to see you? I'm done with COVID. I miss everyone.
Well, I think there are a few times a week that people gather at shul, including Saturday morning and Friday evening. And it's probably going to be more as time goes by, because I bet, looking around, I bet many of us have been vaccinated.
Yes.
And many more of us will be vaccinated in the next month or two. So I think there are plans for that. So, but as Daryl said, you can always tune in on Wednesday night if you just want to see our faces. There's usually a nice crowd here.
Right.
Daryl, did you want to say anything else before we close out?
About the schmooze? No. About anything? Are you being coy?
No. I'm serious. No.
We don't. No.
Okay. I didn't want to step on your toes by, finishing things up.
No, go ahead.
The book, I'm going to say, is going to be available at the Becky Sisterhood gift shop. Harriet Friedman, reach out to her.
And Karen.
And Karen Cassip. Should they email you? What should they do to, yes?
Email us directly or giftshop@becky.org and we'll put you on the list.
Great. And she said they'll be in maybe the end of the week, maybe the beginning of next week.
Yeah.
And I think everybody should get the book and read it. It's very good. Or listen to it, because I also would love, I'm sure that your reading of the book is also lovely. So thank you so much, Roya. This was so fantastic. And I do miss being in the sanctuary with you and hearing your whoops every now and then when something happens. So that I will really enjoy when we can do that again. And congratulations on this wonderful book. I hope it goes really, really well. And thank you for letting us, inaugurate your book talks.
Thank you so much.
Next week, we have another schmooze. Our in-house resident ethnomusicologist, Rachel Edelstein, is doing a talk that she calls Singing Around the Seder Table, the Music and Memories of Passover. So it should be very tuneful and interesting. 8 o'clock next Wednesday evening. And I hope to see as many of you there as possible. And again, thank you, Roya. This was really great.
Thank you. I'm delighted to see you. You made my week, my month, and I love you all.
I love you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you much. Okay.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Sure. I'll show you something. No, why, it's interesting that for no apparent reason.
Good night, everybody.